Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Superman and Lois Season 4, Episode 5. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So, this episode gives us a lot more insight into Lex, kind of understanding him more in this continuity of what he came from. I don't know enough about Lex's backstory. I feel like, obviously, the complicated relationship with his family gets covered in Supergirl, but I don't really, obviously Smallville, but I'm like, that was more on his father's side of things. I don't ever really remember the mom's side of things, but either way, in his continuity, his dad left his mom and didn't really want to be a father, and so she took a lot of that. I don't know if he was ever abusive towards her. That was kind of unclear. It seemed like in that scene, that short scene we got, it could be interpreted that way. She was definitely abusive towards Lex and kind of took a lot of her anger and frustration out on him. And it's ironic considering he's the man who takes his anger and frustration out on other people, and never really planned to be a father, at least when he did, or got married young. And it's just him and his wife. She left because she felt like he always put everything else before her. His vendettas, all that. It seems like it becomes that conversation of, you were with Lex for a while, so he was doing some of his supervillain stuff at the time. Did you overlook a lot of that stuff, or was it so hidden that, some of it was in plain sight, but you didn't recognize it until, the murder charges came up, and you're like, wow, this is real. Maybe the stuff that I've heard rumors, because Elizabeth always had to deal with being a Luthor. Having that last name ostracized her a lot in life because people just assume, you have the last name Luthor. What does that make you? You're just like your father. That's that sad connotation of a child shouldn't have to carry the weight of who their father or parent is, but she did. And once again, it's just it's that thing of, you can understand where Lex's frustration comes from, but he fixates on everything. His obsession with Superman even before all this. We haven't really gotten into it, but that's always a core aspect to this character, that he can be obsessed with Superman, thinking Superman is some threat and never recognizing the evil he does. It's always like a hypocrisy where it's Superman's this great there. Well, what about the things you do? It's everything I do is in the greater good of humanity. And for him, it's I'm getting back what was taken from me. My family was destroyed. It's only fair. It's only right that, because I think it's also there's also that jealousy element of, hey, your husband, Superman in general, before he even found out about Clark and Lois of it all, but it's Clark gets to have these godlike abilities, and it's not on an even playing field. How can we trust you to have these abilities? And it's also just, I think a lot of that kind of applies still in this moment of just kind of the world needs to be fair, and my background sucked, and my upbringing sucked, and I made myself the mate. I'm the person that made me who I am. My smarts got me to where I am, and to have that all stripped away, not only by Lois, but also by Superman, this superpower being you hate. It's just it's all convalescing and just culminating in this rage he has towards this family. It just makes it that much easier to hate them, because all his hate, all the anger he's built up. And once again, the prison system doesn't necessarily, the prison system, there's not to speak in generalizations. It can reform. It is possible to reform. Should it always be able to reform? Sure. But does it always? No. But in Lex's case, it's he wasn't trying to reform, because I went to jail for something I didn't do. I lost my family for something I didn't do. But it's something that keeps coming up in the episode. It's yes, but you've done other stuff too. But he's that's not the point. I didn't, because she's a liar. It's she's not a liar. You are the monster that you are. And once again, just because of this one crime you didn't commit, you went to jail for this one crime, but for him, it's this twisted notion of, and that's not fair. It's life isn't fair. You had 17 years unrightfully stolen from you, but arguments could still be, yeah, but you were a bad guy that needed to go away. And you're, instead of moving on, he refuses to. He needs his revenge, that deep-seated need. Like, you have your daughter in front of you. I mean, and I guess, like, it also stems from, yes, like, Elizabeth was with him when he was arrested. I mean, granted, she was in school, but it was like he was supposed to come to, like, her, I don't know, it was like a performance she was putting on with her class, and it's like, I don't know if it was like a recital type of thing or what, but it's like, he was going to be there, and that Clark shows up, Superman shows up to, like, he's like, I talked to the police and asked them if I could be the one to bring you in. And he tried to be amicable about it. He waited till your daughter was in the school building. He didn't walk up in front of you. He's like, in front of my daughter. It's like, dude, she didn't even see Superman. She just went inside. But it's probably like, people like, yo, is that Superman out there? I'm sure it got her attention, so it kind of happened regardless. And I'm sure, like, you know, it gained attention, like Superman bringing in Lex Luthor. So it still was kind of in front of her, but Clark and Lois are tackling this from two different angles. Because Clark is he tried to talk to Lex, one father to another. It's like, I'm sorry, we made a mistake, and yes, we took you away from your family, but that is still on you. Like, the fact is, yes, it sucks, we did make a mistake, but also your actions are still your actions, and at the end of the day, you can walk away from this. You can break this cycle of hate. He's like, I know what it's like to be a father. I'm talking to you as father, from one father to another. Superman trying to talk Lex off of this, because this can't go on forever. You know, I can't let you keep putting my family in danger. And then Lois, looking through files, her father's stuff, was able to track down Elizabeth, who is in fact played by Elizabeth Henstridge. I said it during the episode when we saw the pictures of her as an adult. I was like, is that Elizabeth Henstridge? If it's not, it looks a lot like her. And it is. Interestingly enough, she's also directed this episode too. So I was like, that's crazy. I was also curious. I was like, is she going to do an American accent? She started speaking British. I was like, well, her mom's British, so it kind of makes sense. But it's like, no. But then it's like, she lived in Metropolis for most of her life. But then, like, they kind of explain it away. It's like, well, I went to London and I kind of put on an accent just to fit in, which I think was almost almost reinventing herself, kind of getting away from the Luthor name. So she kind of puts it's kind of a funny thing, but there is also, like, it's just kind of like a little added thing. I think it's a thing where you could easily make it so, like, no, she still has an American accent, but you could also twist it by being like, you could add like a darker connotation to, I want it to fit in, as in I wanted to distance myself as much as possible, so I wanted to leave behind the Elizabeth I was to be the Elizabeth I am now. So there's layers to that. Like, I'm sure those decisions were kind of made that, you know, I wonder, was that like a written decision, or I assume that maybe that was like I'm sure it's a collaboration between Elizabeth and, like, the writers of the show of, like, making that a choice. I mean, it comes down to her. I don't know if any of that would really be written down of, like that was, you know, maybe that was just kind of a conscious choice Elizabeth made, or whatever the case may be. But Lois reached out to her to be like, turns out she's 6 months pregnant, so it's like, please talk to your father. He's trying to destroy my family. It's like, yes, your father did not kill Moxie. And it's like, yeah, but he did that other stuff too. And she's like, yes, please just talk to your father, wanting to end this cycle. And ultimately, they do meet. And there's just so much there. There's the distance, the years. The divorce did not help, because his ex says that at the end of the day, I hope that you never get to the point that you try to draw Elizabeth in and then push her away just like you did me. And ultimately that's what he does in the episode, but we'll get to that in a second. But, like, he had multiple attempts to make things right with Elizabeth. She kept trying to reach back out to him, but he was just so, and especially for her, it's like, you refuse to take responsibility. Because he was like, yeah, why should I take responsibility for something I didn't do? This is their fault. It's Lois's fault for sending me to prison for something I didn't do. But it's like, yes, but you did other stuff too. Like, you were so, it's like, I'm sure it's like talking, like for you it feels like you're talking in circles, because it's like you're so stubborn, you're so egotistical, you're so prideful. Once again, there is also that element of you did go to prison for something you didn't do. You lost a lot. You lost everything to you that kept you grounded, that kept you probably sane, especially because like the letters from Elizabeth are the only thing that kept him going and in prison, and to kind of lose that, like if he kept in touch with Elizabeth the entire time, maybe some of that anger would have subsided. But just, Elizabeth needed to distance herself from everything, and it's just she wanted to kind of a brand new fresh start. So I think it's so much, just the dominoes just kept falling, and that just made him grow more inward and more angry and more fixated on the day he'd get his revenge against Superman and Lois. And now he also has the added bonus of it's kind of 2-for-1. Going after Superman and Lois, it's kind of like, oh, I don't have to go after you separately. I can go as you a package deal, because I get to kill you, but I also get to destroy your family, and that involves killing him. So still doesn't know, because he's like, oh, it must be some Kryptonian technology that lets you come back. It's like, to an extent, but also Sam Lane, and he'll probably never let him know, like, hey, Sam Lane is the reason why I'm still alive. You kind of put him in a position to come back to life by killing Sam in episode 3. Like, you kind of were your ultimate undoing in a lot of ways. So, but I guess I wonder, will that ever get found out by Lex? Maybe not. But I don't know. I think there's also I think you can make this argument, and I'm curious how other people feel about it. I think you can make an argument it is messed up for Lois and Clark to put Elizabeth in this position where, like, she wanted nothing to do with her father. She hid away from him. But it's also like, yeah, we're desperate. Like, that thing is so powerful. Clark, it was in top form and still couldn't beat it. I'm not nearly as strong. I've only been back 3 weeks and I'm still recovering. Like, and the only I'd assume Jordan and Jonathan would have the edge on him where he is currently, but maybe even in his weakened state, he still has the edge on them. But it's still a thing of, at the end of the day, like, none of us are ready for that fight. And I'll go ahead and jump to it. Well, I'll finish this point I was making. I get it. Like, we're afraid that he's going to send this thing after us, but it's like, we don't. It's messed up to kind of drag Elizabeth in this, but it's kind of like your Hail Mary. It's kind of like, what do you have beyond this? Because Lois is like, you might have to hide at the Fortress of Solitude, but he's like, no, they'll send that thing after you. And it's like, he also knows your boys have powers now, so that's also going to play an element of, like, him probably sending it after your boys. I don't know. But it's like, because Lois is like, if he was going to send it after me, he would have done it by now. And it's like, well, because he wants you to suffer, and if he's angry enough, he'd just straight up send it after you regardless, but still. But, because Clark tried to speak, as a father, where it's like, right, I was around your age when I lost my father. And she's like, I'm sorry, but it's like, I'm guaranteeing you your father was not like my father. And because even Clark's saying, like, hey, I know I can't understand your circumstance. I mean, they've all kind of been in this losing a father situation, but everyone's father, Sam was a good guy. Jonathan Kent was a good guy. Can't compare these two, the hearts and souls of those two honorable people versus this evil man that is Lex Luthor. But they're trying to appease to any humanity, any good that might still be in his heart, because it's like it has to work, because other than this they have no other plan. And Elizabeth was willing to give him another shot, because for her it's like, the father that sat down with me in that closet after constantly hearing my mom and dad fight, and it's just like feeling like it's about me, and it's like, I didn't really plan on being a father, but I'm glad to be yours and have you in my life. And he not convinced, but he said it was Elizabeth's choice, but it's still like everyone kind of taps to his tune and kind of goes along with the strings he pulls. But I do think he was sincere in wanting his daughter with him. He didn't want her taken away from him, and she made the choice to stay, and then he ultimately got arrested, and eventually she left. So for her, it's like the dad I knew was a fallacy, was never real. Because he was like, for you, you're the only person in this world who's ever known the real me. And she's kind of questioning whether she did or not. But it's like she remembers her father, and she's just like, okay, I will give you a shot. Especially because he opened up about the circumstances he comes from, even saying he's never been back to South Metropolis since then. I don't know if that's just like since his arrest, he's never been back, or just once he got out, you know? But at the end of the day, she asked him to give up his anger, because for him, it's because the moment, like, she's like, wait, you've been here the entire time since your release? He's like, yeah, well, I left, but then I came back. It's like, for Lois. So she was right. He was like, of course that's what she would say. But she's like, okay, this could be your chance to start over, to break the cycle of hate. You can be in me and your grandchild's life, but you have to walk away. Just let this go. And he's like, no, she has to pay. And Elizabeth's like, don't ever come into my life ever again. And I cannot have my son raised around this. I will not let him be another victim of this like cycle of hatred. And it's just, they did everything, and he will never take responsibility of my anger is controlling me. Like I can't stress that enough. It's understandable. You did go to prison for something you didn't do, but it's also that conundrum of, but you are Lex Luthor. You're a terrible person. You've done terrible things. So it's just kind of like that, ugh. Because you would feel bad for anyone and understand anyone's frustrations for going to prison for something you didn't do. But on top of that, how do you contend with the person you sent to prison being a monster? They just weren't a monster in the way you thought they were. They didn't commit the crime you thought they did, but they committed a litany of other stuff. I mean, hell, let alone the amount of times he's tried to kill Superman. I mean, successfully did it. So it's just, it's such a conundrum, because you're like, I understand you understand the anger, but it's also unfair. You know, and it's like, you want justice, you want retribution, but it's like, you have a chance, but he refuses to move on because he can't let go of his anger, because he is the person that fixates, and his fixation has been on Lois, and he can't let go. Some other storylines this episode, we'll circle over to the Lois stuff, because obviously it ties into the Jonathan of it all, where Jonathan is with, well, Candace shows up and she wants to be around Jonathan, but he keeps getting distracted because, well, he's the one playing the role of Superboy. It's like, well, having the struggle of balancing like your life with your superhero stuff, especially because your brother wanted to take a step back, and it's kind of put Jordan in this very awkward position of like, yeah, he's working with my mom. It's like, oh, he's working at the Gazette now? Why didn't he say anything about it? Yeah, that's kind of crazy. He didn't say anything about that. Yeah, so it's just, every time they're spending time together, like, they have to come up with excuses of like, oh yeah, that shelter story. And Lois is like, yes, Jordan will fill you in about it. And she's like, so you're going to fill me in on it? And Jordan's just like, why am I getting screwed? I know I said I'd take a step back for the Superboy thing, but come on, guys, this isn't fair. Also, there was one of the people that was there in town, is a girl that they went to school with. She confessed in this episode, like, I know that your dad is Superman. And she's like, I'm not going to tell anyone. But that becomes a conversation of, dude, it's getting out there. Like, you know, it's like, I don't know if they didn't know that the Daily Planet had, I think they said, like, I don't know if that comment about, well, it's not like the Daily Planet knows. I think it's specifically about him being their dad. I was about to say, like, they published an article about him living, but I think they were talking about more specifically, like, oh, like, that's just one person's like, no, that dude also knows too, because he went to Lana about it. So two people know about dad, and it's kind of getting out there more and more. And it's like, I'm so curious to see if they go down the Supergirl route. I think I referenced this previously, but if you never saw the end of Supergirl, the final scene of Supergirl is Kara being interviewed by Cat Grant, and announces to the world that Kara's like, oh, I'm Kara Danvers and I'm Supergirl. So she, in that universe, on Earth 1, once again, she's one of the few superheroes in that continuity. Like, her and Oliver are outed, you know, as superheroes. So I'm curious if the end result of this is going to be that Clark will be out, like, have no choice, especially because more and more people, at least in Smallville, know now, and that's becoming more and more of a thing. That ended up being this interesting conundrum because Jonathan is keeping it secret from Candace, but she knows she's being lied to, and that's frustrating. And it's like, well, what do you do with that? Because it's like he's new to all this, and it's like, do I tell her the truth about what do I do? And it ultimately ends up being Jordan helping him out by telling him the truth. She's like, oh, I know everything. And he's like, well, what do you mean everything? It's like, your brother told me about your dad and the powers. And he's like, oh, so everything. It's like, yeah, you're lucky to have such a cool brother. He's like, yeah, he's okay. I'm curious to see if that ends up being an issue in the long run because because Jordan's been through this with the whole Sarah of it all, and he's like, man, I want things to work out. My brother, like, is in love, and I want to have your back. I haven't always been the most supportive brother, but it's like, I have, but I've always been like, there's always been a back and forth of my support. So it's like, I want you to know I've got your back too. You've always supported me, so let me do this for you. But I'm curious to see in the long run if Jonathan has an issue with the fact that Jordan did that, because it was up to me to tell Candace the truth. The fact is, he didn't, like, circumstances forced him to reveal his situation to Candace. Clark was kind of in a similar boat. He kind of made a conscious choice. Circumstances pushed him to make the conscious choice of telling Lana the truth. But I guess it's also like, to be fair, it's like, Jonathan's only recently gotten his powers in the past, like, couple weeks, so it's still a new enough development, but a whole, like, well, your dad being Superman and keeping that secret, I understand, plus you've got superpowers, your brother's got superpowers. I'm just so curious to see if Jonathan's going to have an issue with that going forward or not, whether they'll kind of brush past that. Because him being like, you told her, I should have been the one to tell her in my own time, and you can't. I'm curious to see if that ends up being an issue for Jonathan or not. He seems chill in this episode, but I'm curious to see if that could be something we see going forward. And we're already at the halfway point for the final season, so I don't know if that's something they would have covered under different circumstances, or would that never have been an issue? I don't know. I'm curious to see, but like I said, it's becoming more and more people now know. Once again, it's kind of a thing of, hey, they deserve to know, and I guess I'm just so curious to see if that's just going to be an open secret in Smallville, and everyone's going to be content with, like, keeping that hush hush, or like I said, will it be revealed in the world? Because because there is the parallel of, well, because I do constantly forget, like, right, because as they kind of showcase, like, we get these flashbacks with Bizarro, it's like, right, he was out and about in the world, but, like, it's a little different because, like, I think in that universe, he never was, like, there was never any Clark Kent. He was always Kal-El. Like, being Superman was all he was. Like, he never had the whole Clark Kent of it all in that universe. So, I don't know. But, speaking of Bizarro, that ends up being Lois's attempt to, as she says later on, we tried to change the wrong heart. So, rather than trying to appease to Lex Luthor, appease to Bizarro, because, like, even when he was dumping Clark's body in episode 1, like, there's still that element of, like, the way he looked at her. He could have probably still attacked her and the children, but he didn't, because it's the faces of his wife and his children, so it's, like, understandable. But it's interesting. Because, like, you could tell, like in that moment, I felt like it kind of recognized Lois in that moment. And she's able to speak to it. It's like, I know what you went through. You lost your family, and I'm so sorry you couldn't go back to them. But please don't take my family away from me. Please don't hurt my family because of you. And it's just like, Doomsday leaves. Now, where he went, what the end result of that's going to be, we'll have to wait to see. But I'm curious to see what happens because Lex lost his daughter and he lost his pet. So he's going to be extra pissed, going to be extra motivated to come after Lois and them even more so. And I'm curious to see in what fashion he's going to strike. Something I meant to bring up, I was going to talk about earlier, but I deviated away from it was, and I'm glad I'm remembered. It definitely seems like Clark has PTSD. Understandably, you literally got brutally murdered. Like, he's like, I've never been on such a one-sided slugfest. It's like no matter how much I tried to kill this thing, it kept coming back. I thought it was interesting too because his mom was like, yeah, we've never experienced anything like that on Krypton. And I had to pause because I was like, wait, isn't Doomsday originally from Krypton? I was like, that's an interesting change. I had to look it up to confirm because I quickly Googled it. Quick thing was like, oh, it existed. Genetic engineering prehistoric like Krypton. I was like, interesting because I think, once again, it's been a hot minute since I watched Smallville. I'd watched it originally when it was originally on air, but like maybe 2015, 2016, I binged the entire series. But if I remember correctly, didn't Doomsday come to Earth the same time that Clark did in the Smallville continuity? I think kind of like the Morgan Edge story kind of was Doomsday's story, at least in Smallville. But also in Krypton, it was the same thing of he was a person that chose to be like Krypton's secret weapon, and it was a person. I don't remember if he was even a soldier. He might have just been a civilian that volunteered. I think he might have been a soldier to, be experimented on to protect his family and whatnot. So that's why I was kind of like, isn't he from Krypton? I was like, I actually don't know. Maybe those two went their own route with it, but it's like, no, it seems like he is Kryptonian specific. So I was like, oh, that's interesting to make it in this continuity. He's not. But yeah, like my point was Clark, because he feels so powerless for the first time. Like, yes, he's going blow to blow with people just as strong as him, but it's never been such a one-sided fight because he's never, like, yeah, he's been knocked down and maybe, like, almost killed, but he was straight up killed, and it's just an enemy he doesn't even know how to beat, and just, like, reliving it through that device made him was like, enough, I don't know what else. She's like, maybe going through it again. He was like, no. It's like, oh, so we might be dealing with a PTSD situation, and I think that might be something new for Clark. He's probably never had to worry about that. There was always another way, and for him, his mom telling him to kind of be hopeful, and it's like, what happens when Superman's hope starts dwindling because he's legitimately afraid and has every right to be. So the Doomsday thing's been nixed for now, but I don't know if that's going to stick. So I'm so curious to see what the back half of this season looks like, what Lex has planned next. Is he going to try and track down Doomsday? And it's like, no, you're going to listen to me, my friend, and you're going after them. Or what is Doomsday going to do? Is it out in space? Is it still hiding out here on Earth? Like, what is he going to do? With that thing just out there, and like, you can't just leave it unchecked. But as long as it's not randomly attacking people, it's fine. But still, like, I don't know what you do with that situation. So I'm curious to see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.